The Beast Inside takes place in two different time periods, jumping back and forth between Adam Stevenson in the year 1979 and his ancestor Nicholas Hyde in 1865. I'll be presenting the game's events in chronological order, both because that's the easiest way to make sense of them, and because only in the first section of the game is it at all possible to be sure of what actually happened. So let's get started with Part 1. Jacob Hyde Reaps the Whirlwind. Jacob Hyde was a 19th century businessman living in Blackstone, New Hampshire. Along with his partner, George Whitehead, he ran a pyrite mine as well as an inn that was almost preposterously luxurious given its remote location. Always a cruel man, Jacob became notably worse after the death of his wife and began taking out all of his frustrations on his son Nicholas, excessively punishing the boy for even the smallest infractions. His favorite punishment involved locking Nicholas away in a secret room for days at a time, keeping him in total darkness. This had the effect of shattering the young boy's mind and creating a second personality within it. This second, unnamed personality became a dumping ground for all of Nicholas's negative emotions and impulses, but instead of helping him control his behavior, the personality functioned as an unrestrained id, taking over his consciousness and acting out aggressively. These bouts of bad behavior, stealing, harassing guests at the hotel, hiding his father's possessions, just caused Jacob to punish Nicholas even more severely, creating a vicious cycle in which the son would act out, the father would punish him, which would make the next behavior even worse, and so on. The terrible downward spiral of their relationship truly began only when a young Nicholas smuggled barrels of gunpowder into the mine and detonated them while men were at work. Along with George Whitehead, a handful of miners were killed, and the damage to the mine was so severe that it had to shut down operations. Whether Jacob suspected his son had been involved or merely thought it was negligence, he covered up the murder and paid off Judge Norton, the law in Blackstone, to certify it as an accident. A woman named Maria, the widow of one of the miners killed in the explosion, confronted Jacob, demanding compensation for her husband's death. Jacob refused, citing the terms of his employment, that he worked at the mine at his own risk. She persisted in her demands, and in response he viciously beat her, secure in the knowledge that Judge Norton would prevent him from suffering any legal consequences. As a result of the beating, Maria suffered a miscarriage. This tragedy drove her further into religious mania, and left her obsessed with a desire to bring down Jacob Hyde in whatever way she could. Emboldened by his success in the mine explosion, Nicholas's actions grew far more extreme. He stepped up his harassment of the guests at his father's hotel, even killing some of them when they were staying alone and made the mistake of isolating themselves. He hid the bodies deep in the shuttered mine so that no one would be able to find them. Eventually, Nicholas turns his rage onto Judge Norton, the corrupt justice who had covered for his father's crimes. Nicholas locked the judge away in a punishment cave beneath the house, torturing him for days on end. Alarmed by the judge's disappearance and growing suspicious about his son's actions, Jacob searched the house and found the judge in the secret room. He set the judge free, but was then murdered by Nicholas, who returned just at that moment, wearing a mask and his father's cloak and hat. The judge fled the house and ran towards the hotel, but Nicholas caught him and slashed his throat before he was able to find help. Nicholas returned home and disposed of the evidence of his crimes, even walling up the hallway to the secret torture room. Both Private Detective Walter Gilman and the local authorities conclude that Jacob Hyde likely killed Judge Norton and then fled to avoid prosecution. While the authorities give up their search, Gilman stays on, continuing to investigate the death, hoping to find proof of Hyde's guilt and make a name for himself by doing so. When word of his snooping reached Maria, she wrote him a letter, offering information about the case. Unbeknownst to everyone, she'd been stalking the Hyde family, and has seen Nicholas sneaking out of the house at night to sabotage and murder. Gilman planned to meet her, but first decides to go to the mine and look for evidence that might be hidden inside. Nicholas followed Gilman to the mine and murdered him, discovering Maria's letter on his body. He then traveled to her home in the swamps and murdered her to get rid of the final loose end that risked exposing his crimes. Without his father around to make excuses for him, Nicholas isn't able to hold in his more extreme behavior. He's adjudicated as mentally unstable and spends the next decade in a mental institution. It's at this point that his part of the game's story begins. The player follows Nicholas, who has completely blocked out his violent actions and the majority of his childhood trauma, as he explores his childhood home and its surroundings. During one long, terrible night, he is confronted by his own past deeds and haunted by the apparitions of all the people he had killed. Also, in a bizarre interlude, he appears to kill a man who was hiding out in the abandoned hotel as part of a plan to kill Abraham Lincoln. Eventually, he confronts his demons, burns down the long-abandoned inn, and locks away the darker aspect of himself for good. He writes a journal detailing his delusional journey, then changes his last name to Stevenson and settles down, hoping to put the darkness of the Hyde name behind him. For the record, there's another ending in which Nicholas goes right on killing dressed in his costume and mask, but it's clearly not intended to be the canonical resolution to the story. So, with that relatively simple tale of madness and revenge out of the way, let's move on to the far more unhinged and baffling section of the game. Part 2. Adam Stevenson is insane. Or is he? The story opens in August 1979, with Adam and his wife Emma, who is pregnant with their first child, moving into the old Hyde estate in Blackstone, New Hampshire. Blissfully unaware about his family's dark history, Adam knows it only as the Stevensons' refuge, a bucolic getaway that generations have enjoyed. Adam is a cryptographer working for the CIA, and he believes that moving to the peace and quiet of the country will help him focus on his work. Breaking a series of Soviet codes that are considered to be of the utmost importance to national security. After finding pages from Nicholas's diary hidden away in the house's attic, Adam blacks out, and things start getting weird. It's here that the game's reality completely breaks down, and it becomes impossible to tell exactly what's happening for certain. I'll describe Adam's actions here, but unfortunately, I can't offer too much interpretation on them, since the game offers multiple possible realities. I'll lay out the theories and focus on the one I think is the most plausible, but any conclusions about what to believe have to be left up to the player. As for why Adam goes into this fugue state, there's no clear evidence offered. Either Adam suffers from a severe undiagnosed case of dissociative identity disorder, or he's being influenced by the spirit of Nicholas Hyde's dark half. Those are really the only two possible options, since he begins having blackouts long before there's any serious stress put on him. For simplicity's sake, I'll list the blackout actions as being committed by Nicholas rather than Adam to make it clear which personality is performing them. During the first blackout, Nicholas goes off into the woods, murders a deer, turns off the house's power, takes a fuse out of the fuse box, and places it, along with some kind of tracking device, into the deer, which he then hangs from the roof of the barn. He then tears a number of pages out of his diary and hides them in the house, so that Adam will only gradually learn new pieces of the story, giving Nicholas more time to exert power over him. Once he's completed that task, he returns to the house and Adam takes control. Adam looks for some fuses in the shed near the house, but instead finds his own clothes, bloody from when he slaughtered the deer. Adam is confused and frightened and tries to figure out where the clothes could have come from. Of course, on some level he knows, but he can't consciously admit what's going on, so his mind creates a device that can reveal his own actions to himself without having to consciously accept that he'd performed them. This leads him to imagine that he's using a quantum localizer, a bizarre science fiction device that can show him what people were doing in the recent past. Of course, what's actually happening is that Adam is simply remembering the things Nicholas did while in control of his body, but they're being filtered through a framework that allows him to pretend that he's merely investigating actions rather than remembering them. After locating the fuse, Adam returns to the house and fixes the power, but pointedly doesn't tell Emma about the deer, the sabotage, or the man he believes is watching them. Even though he claims to believe that he's being stalked by Russian spies, the Nicholas personality, desperate to increase its power, won't let him do the sensible thing in that situation, warn his wife and involve his employers at the CIA. Instead, he just continues working as if nothing unusual has happened. The couple spends the next weeks getting the house in order, and then Adam gets to work on decoding Russian communications. In a truly bizarre scene, he attempts to break these codes using an Enigma machine, of the type the Nazis used in World War II. It's unclear if this is just the game developers having a love for the machine's aesthetic, or a symptom of Adam's growing detachment from reality. Adam takes a break from his code work when he discovers more pages from the diary hidden in his desk. He begins reading them, and Nicholas again takes over his body. Nicholas heads to the burned ruins of his family's inn, finds a safe, and hides the next set of pages inside of it. He also places a bug inside of a treehouse at the edge of the property to increase Adam's paranoia. Then he returns to Adam's office and pretends to solve the Russian code, writing up a message that sounds like spy talk, but has nothing to do with the actual code Adam was sent. Nicholas then makes notes on the diary page to make it seem as if the pages somehow held secret clues that allowed the cipher to be decoded, thus ensuring that Adam would have a good reason to keep looking for more pages. How can we be sure that the message Nicholas wrote down has nothing to do with the code he was sent? 2 reasons. 1. The message contains numbers as single characters, rather than written out, which his method of coding and decoding would not allow for. And 2. The message has the exact same number of characters as the code sheet, which would only make sense if the Russian secret message had been written in English, which there's no reason to believe it would. So obviously Nicholas just crafted a quick message designed to make the diaries seem important, and Adam was already predisposed to believe it. When Adam resumes control, Emma tells him that she spotted someone outside the front of the house, but that he was too far away for her to make out any details. She also claims to have seen someone watching her from the woods a few days earlier. Not knowing that it was Nicholas that she saw, Adam heads out into the woods to look for the intruder. He uses the quantum localizer to follow him to the treehouse, where he finds both the bug and a photograph of Emma. There are 4 possibilities about what this photograph could mean. It could have been taken by Nicholas as part of his campaign of psychological manipulation. It could have been taken by actual Russian spies. It could have been taken by Agent H, a character we'll get to in a little bit, or it could have been a complete delusion on Adam's part. There's no way to know for sure. While searching the treehouse, Adam sees what he believes to be a spy watching from the next house over. Obviously, this character is a figment of his imagination, unless we're being asked to believe that a spy would dress up in a suit, tie, and hat in order to sneak around a forest. No, the stereotypical nature of the spy's appearance is all we need to confirm that he's just a creation of Adam's mind. Adam chases the spy all the way to the burned-out wreck of the hotel, where he finds the pages that Nicholas has left for him. So, desperate for more help with the Russian codes, he reads them, once again allowing Nicholas to take over his body. Now things get a little fuzzy, as Nicholas is in control for a full 6 hours, giving him plenty of time to take action. During this period, he travels to the Firewatch Tower and kills the person that he finds there. As to that person's identity, we'll address that in a bit. He leaves the final set of pages next to the body, essentially challenging Adam to commit himself to reading them even when faced with a horrible crime, thereby completely turning himself over to Nicholas's control. Then Nicholas goes to a clearing in the woods and kills the 4 people he finds there. Or maybe he doesn't? This part of the game is woefully unclear, since we never receive any independent verification of these people's existence. It's possible that he kills 3 people at the camp, then chases a 4th down and murders her in a mine with a pickaxe before going back and hanging the other 3 from a tree. But there's no way to be completely sure that any of that actually happened. If they are real, then they were either campers in the wrong place at the wrong time, or a team of spies, either Russian or American, looking for notes hidden by the aforementioned Agent H around Adam's property. Since these notes are almost certainly a figment of Adam's imagination, the likelihood is that these people, if they ever really existed, were just innocent campers who Nicholas murdered for no good reason other than to further unhinge Adam. Then Nicholas returns to the house and breaks a window, climbs into the office, and steals Adam's code-breaking work, which he also drops next to the body at the ranger station. Then he heads back to the camp and allows Adam to take over once more. Adam wakes up in a clearing and quickly finds the camp. Inside it is a map of his property with 5 locations marked on it, as well as code words associated with each of those locations. He follows the map and finds strange chests locked with letter-based padlocks, which Adam can only unlock using the code words from the map and cipher keys painted in the environment nearby. Inside the chests are telegrams from Agent H, a former associate of Adam's who had disappeared some time earlier. The telegrams warn Adam about the Soviet practice of training people to act like Americans and then insert them into North American life decades before they're needed for any covert activity, giving them a chance to fully ingrain themselves into the government and industry before they're activated. There's no reason to believe that these notes are real. While Agent H may have been a real person who went mad with paranoia, and might even appear in the game, the likelihood that he would have built a scavenger hunt in Adam's backyard is somewhat preposterous. And just like the quantum localizer, the most probable explanation here is that these notes are figments of Adam's imagination, planted by Nicholas in order to further alienate him from Emma. Speaking of Emma, while Adam was gone, she noticed the broken glass, couldn't find Adam, and called the police for help. A deputy arrives, sees both the broken glass and the slashed tires of the family car, and feels it's serious enough to be worth investigating, so he heads into the woods to follow Nicholas's trail. Once Adam makes it home, Emma explains about the police officer, and Adam, growing increasingly paranoid, notes that the police officer could have been a spy. Notably, this theory comes up in one of H's notes soon after this scene, further suggesting that they're a creation of Adam's mind. Adam also finds a note that Nicholas left for him, telling him to beware of sparrows, the term Russian intelligence used for women who were assigned to romance and get close to men in order to gather information from them over long timelines. Once again, Nicholas is trying to manipulate Adam into turning against his wife. Adam follows Nicholas's trail through the woods, eventually leading him to a Firewatch Tower and ranger station. The station seems to be full of surveillance equipment and records about his comings and goings, along with a coded message suggesting that Emma is a Russian spy assigned to watch Adam. Making his way into the basement, Adam finds the dead body along with his codes and the final pages of Nicholas's diary. So, who is this dead body? The two outlandish possibilities are that A, he was a Russian spy who was actually watching Adam along with Emma, or B, it's Agent H, who knew that Russians had infiltrated the CIA and had gone into hiding and decided to watch Adam in the hopes of protecting him. Most likely, though, this is just the body of the ranger from that Firewatch tower, who managed to get caught up in Nicholas's madness. Adam reads the last set of pages, and once again Nicholas seizes control. He heads back to the house, but on the way there he's intercepted by the deputy, who immediately realizes that something is wrong and attempts to arrest him. The two men struggle outside of the house, and the fight ends with Nicholas cutting off the deputy's head before he and the corpse fall into the well. Adam wakes up in the well, cuts himself free of the body, and then climbs out. Desperate to justify his actions to himself, he imagines that he finds evidence that the deputy was a Russian spy. In this case, a lighter with Lenin's face on one side and the Russian national crest on the other. This is, of course, a ludicrous thing for a spy to carry in America. It's hard to believe that many Russians would even own one, but it doesn't have to make sense to us. It just needs to assuage Adam's guilt for killing the cop. He heads inside the house and finds a secret room above his office. It's a tiny bedroom where Nicholas would be locked away as punishment. When he reads Nicholas's confession and sees the evidence of his abuse, Adam's last bit of resistance is broken down, and Nicholas is able to possess him without Adam reading pages from the diary. Now fully in control, Nicholas sets about tying up loose ends so that he can get away with his crimes. He knocks out Emma, breaks down the wall that leads to the torture dungeon, and then ties her to a chair inside of it. Then he goes back into the woods, retrieves the bodies of the campers, and chops them into pieces to make them easier to dispose of. He takes all of the body parts and loads them into the deputy's truck, hoping to drive them to the nearby lake and hide them there. At the end of the drive, though, Adam manages to regain control of his body and winds up crashing the truck into the lake. He escapes his near drowning and rushes back to the house to save Emma, but Nicholas has grown too powerful. He takes over Adam's body, puts on the mask he'd hidden in the house, and then goes downstairs and brutally murders Emma with an axe. What happens next is open for debate, and the game has no real interest in explaining the truth of the matter to the player. Either A, Adam is grabbed by Russian spies and taken to a fake hospital where they can interrogate him, or B, shortly after killing Emma, more police arrive looking for the missing deputy and arrest Adam. Whichever one is true, Adam wakes up in what appears to be a hospital suffering from memory loss. Electroshock therapy gives him access to memories of Nicholas's actions while in his body, and he's horrified by what he's done. At that point, he's left with two options. Believe that Emma and everyone else around him were spies, and that Nicholas's actions were justified, or believe that he's sick and accept treatment. No matter which the player chooses, no definitive answers are given, but in either option, the developers add a final detail designed to leave the player guessing. If Adam attacks the doctor doesn't call out in Russian, and guards don't immediately enter to help, suggesting that he's a real doctor and this is a real hospital. If Adam accepts treatment, though, the first thing the doctor wants to ask him about is his job, which is what a spy would want. Even to the end, the developers are dead set against giving the player an easy way to answer any of their questions. Perhaps we'll find out what the truth was if they ever get around to making the London Scent sequel that the game's The End screen suggests is coming. So that's the story of The Beast Inside. Now, before we wrap this up, let's check out some of the fun random stuff I noticed while playing the game. The pin and tumbler lock of the type that Nicholas picks in the game weren't invented until 1861, and weren't widely available for years afterwards, so they couldn't have been in an inn built in the later 1840s or early 1850s. The flat disc gramophone wasn't invented until 1887. While the blue recycling bin was invented in 1977, it wasn't used until 1983, and for a while it was a strictly Canadian thing. The game is rife with references to horror fiction, strange fiction, and fiction that the developers enjoy. I'm sure that I missed a bunch of them, but here's the ones I've found. Be sure to drop any you noticed in the comments section below the video. The main story's twist is given away by the choice to assign the family name Hyde to Joseph and Nicholas, referring to the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The doctor that is hired to examine and later institutionalize Nicholas is Herbert West, H.P. Lovecraft's Reanimator. This pregnancy book was apparently written by Freddy Krueger's mother, Amanda Krueger. These police reports reference There Will Be Blood, listing the deputy as Paul Thomas Anderson, the director of that film. And one of the people mentioned in the report is Daniel Plainview, which was the name of the main character. Crystal Lake, the body of water that Adam crashes into in the final chapter, is a reference to Jason's traditional stomping grounds in Friday the 13th. This story about someone not recognizing their family, or even themselves, is signed J. Capgrass, which is appropriate, since it's an accurate description of a brain disorder wherein people lose their ability to recognize others, and think that everyone around them has been replaced with imposters. It's named after the psychiatrist Joseph Capgras. Grady, the the hotel's janitor, is named after Delbert Grady from The Shining. Speaking of The Shining, check out the carpeting in the living room. The detective Gilman is named after the main character from H.P. Lovecraft's Dreams in the Witch House, a story which also featured secrets hidden in the walls of an old house. That's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed taking this extended look at the beast inside with me. I'll see you back here for the next thing, but until then, au revoir.